Every week there's a new knife promising to be the choice of Navy SEALs. And every week, thousands of people buy one, thinking they're taking home a real piece of military-grade gear. Most of these cheap tactical knives never got anywhere near a military unit. No name steel, no certification, just a flat black coating and a convincing tagline on the box. Today, I'm exposing 5 traps that get you paying for a story instead of a knife. And then I'm going to show you which cheap knife actually earns the claim it's making. One of them is going to surprise you because it's simpler than you think. I'm Ranger Jack, 17 years outfitting clients on alpine and winter wilderness trips, no brand deals, no free gear. When a blade fails out there, it's not a bad review, it's a real problem. Number 1, the tactical coating trap. Here's why people buy it. The knife shows up flat black, aggressive serrations on the spine, a name that sounds like it belongs to a special ops unit. On a shelf or in an ad that reads as toughness. Your brain makes the connection automatically. Black, angular, aggressive, so it must be strong? Here's the contradiction. That coating is cosmetic. It tells you nothing about the steel underneath it. Black is not hardness. Black is paint, or at best, a thin oxide layer that fights surface rust and nothing else. Here's the failure point. Most of these knives never publish a steel type or a Rockwell hardness rating anywhere. Not on the box, not on the product page, nowhere. That's not an accident. When a manufacturer has a good number to show, they show it because it sells. When there's no number anywhere, it's usually because that number wouldn't help close the sale. Here's the real-world consequence. You baton this knife through denser wood to clear a path or cut a tent stake, and the edge rolls on the first hard pass. It doesn't snap right away. Worse, it bends. And a bent edge doesn't cut straight. It skates across the wood instead of biting in, and your risk of a slip goes up exactly when you're pushing the hardest. Price to performance. You're paying for the appearance of tactical toughness, not the toughness itself. It's the knife equivalent of buying boots for the aggressive tread pattern without ever checking whether the rubber compound holds on wet rock. Here's the nuance. For opening a cardboard box, cutting light cord, easy campsite tasks, it's fine. For anything that depends on real steel under load, it isn't. The verdict: the color is not the steel. And the next one is worse because it doesn't just rely on looks. It relies on an entire story built on nothing. Number 2, the infomercial style ad. Here's why people buy it. The commercial shows an operator in uniform, shaky camera work, tense music, and a flashing caption that says, "Used by Special Forces," in the corner of the screen. That doesn't read as marketing anymore. It reads as proof. Here's the contradiction. No named unit, no verifiable military contract, no published steel spec anywhere. It's theater, carefully staged. It is not a resume, and the gap between the two is exactly what separates a knife you can trust from a knife you can only display. Here's the failure point. Behind the flashy packaging, it's usually a stamped blade cut from soft, cheap steel, and the handle scales are glued on instead of pinned or bolted through. Glue holds up under dead weight. Glue does not hold up under repeated torque. Here's the real-world consequence. You try to use the knife as a lever to pry something loose, a stuck lid, a tight knot, a jammed buckle, and the tip just snaps off in your hand. No warning, and now you're without a knife at the exact moment you needed one. Price to performance. The product is cheap, and the durability is completely predictable, which is to say, low. You weren't misled about the price. You were misled about what the knife is actually for. Here's the nuance. As a drawer knife for opening mail or cutting tape, it does the job. As a field tool that has to hold up under real load, it doesn't. The verdict: the story is selling the knife. The steel isn't doing that work on its own, and the next one is even more deceptive because it doesn't depend on advertising at all. It depends on you trusting a few thousand strangers. Number 3, the 1,000 review illusion. Here's why people buy it. The product page has 4,000 reviews, most of them 5 stars. That reads as overwhelming social proof, the kind of number that makes any hesitation disappear before you even click buy. Here's the contradiction. Most of those reviews come from people who opened the box, tested it once at home, and were satisfied on first contact, not from people who carried this knife week after week underweight, in wet conditions, through real trail use. 5 stars on day 1 is not the same thing as 5 stars after 30 days in the field. Here's the failure point. There's no public edge retention data, and it's built from a generic stainless steel that was never engineered to hold an edge under repeated use. It's an easy steel to mass produce, cheap to buy wholesale, easy to sell, but not easy to keep sharp. Here's the real-world consequence. After a single multi-day trip, the knife already can't cut a rope cleanly anymore. You keep resharpening it, and it still loses its edge too fast because the problem was never your technique. It's the steel itself. Price to performance, it's cheap, with completely predictable trade-offs for that price bracket. The problem isn't that it's inexpensive. The problem is marketing it like serious survival equipment. Here's the nuance. For occasional use around the house or light camping, it's fine. For real trail dependence, it isn't. The verdict: casual use reviews are not the same thing as proven field durability. And that brings me to the next one, which isn't cheap at all, which makes the letdown much harder to swallow. Number 4, premium price, entry-level components. Here's why people buy it. The price is already close to what respected brands charge, which makes you assume the construction matches. After all, why would it cost almost the same if it were inferior? Here's the contradiction. The price went up, but the locking mechanism is still the exact same basic design used in the cheapest models in that same brand's lineup. You're not paying for better engineering, you're paying for better positioning. Here's the failure point. The lock disengages under lateral pressure, exactly the kind of force you apply without even noticing when you're cutting something that's stuck, twisting your wrist mid-cut, or angling the blade to reach a tight spot. Here's the real-world consequence. The folding blade snaps shut on its own without warning in the middle of a cutting motion. That's not just inconvenient. That's the exact kind of failure that cuts a finger to the bone, far from any quick medical help. Price to performance. You paid the price of a top-shelf knife for the engineering of a bottom-shelf one, just because the number on the tag went up. Here's the nuance. For cutting rope stretched flat on a surface with no twisting at all, it holds up fine. For any work involving angle or torque, which is basically all real field work, don't trust it near your fingers. The verdict: you paid for the label, not for the lock. And the final trap is the one most people defend the longest, right up until you put the price next to the actual spec sheet. Number 5, the budget line borrowing credibility from the flagship. Here's why people buy it. It's a brand you've already heard of, one with a real reputation built somewhere in its product lineup. That earns automatic trust, even before you look closely at the specific model in your hand. Here's the contradiction. The brand's flagship line can be genuinely excellent. Good steel, solid construction, a proven track record. But the entry-level version, the cheaper one, cuts costs in exactly the places it shouldn't to hit a lower price point. And it still wears the same logo to sell itself. Here's the failure point. Partial tang instead of full tang, the steel doesn't run all the way through the handle. It stops part way, and the rest of the handle is filled with something else. That's the difference between a knife that can handle repeated batoning through hardwood and one that snaps right at the base of the handle, the single weakest point in the whole build. Here's the real-world consequence. Mid-trip with a client of mine, a knife exactly like this separated from its handle at the worst possible moment, cutting a tangled line under pressure with the group waiting. That's where I learned in practice and not in theory to never judge a knife by the name stamped on it. Price to performance. You're paying for the reputation of the wrong line inside that brand. Here's the nuance. The brand's main line might absolutely deserve your trust. This specific cheaper line doesn't. It's just borrowing the name without inheriting the engineering that goes with it. The verdict? The good name is on the box. The good engineering is not in the knife. 5 traps so far, all built on the same thing. Military-sounding language with nothing to back it up. So here's the question. This whole video exists to answer. Is the knife in this title one more of those traps, or does it actually break the pattern? This time, the answer is different, and I need to be precise here, because this is exactly the spot where most channels exaggerate for clicks. The Ontario Mark III, the Mod 0, doesn't need advertising to back up its claim. It was officially adopted as the standard combat and utility knife for the Navy and for Navy SEALs in late 1982. That's not a nice line on a box. That's a documented adoption history, the kind of fact that exists outside the manufacturer's own sales copy. The build doesn't hide anything behind a nice black finish either. A 440 stainless steel blade, about 6 inches long, a black oxide finish, a functional saw-toothed spine, a high-impact plastic handle resistant to cracking, and a sheath with a brass belt hanger for carry. None of that is a secret. None of it is vague. It's a spec you can actually check, not a loose adjective like rugged or trail-ready. I need to be honest with you about one important thing. Today, Navy SEALs have the freedom to choose their own knives. It isn't mandatory standard issue gear the way it was decades ago when it was first adopted. So, the accurate claim here isn't every SEAL carries this exact knife today. No exceptions. The accurate claim, and the true one, is that this knife has a real documented history of formal military adoption. Something none of the 5 traps in this video can show, no matter how loud their packaging shouts. And there's a detail that matters even more for this specific video. The price has stayed in the affordable range this whole time. You're not paying for something hand-stitched by a private knife maker in a limited run. You're paying for a simple tool made from solid stamped steel with zero fuss in the finish and still backed by real verifiable origin. It's also worth understanding why that's so rare across this entire industry. The tactical knife business figured out a long time ago that the word SEAL sells on its own, without needing any proof behind it. Almost every new budget knife brand has, at some point, tried to attach its own name to this kind of language. Operator approved, Special Forces standard, chosen by professionals. In practice, nobody can verify most of those lines because they were never built to be verified. They were built to be skimmed on a product page, scrolled past without a second thought. The Mark III is the exception precisely because its claim wasn't born in a marketing department. It was born from a formal adoption process, documented outside the manufacturer itself, decades before it ever became a selling point. Verdict: this is the only knife in this video where the label and the steel are telling the exact same story. So here's what's actually worth the money. First, the Ontario Mark III, the knife that earns the top spot in this video, and not because of the reputation attached to it. It earns it because when I test its edge batoning through denser wood, it doesn't roll, it doesn't chip, and it doesn't lose its cutting line. Simple steel, full tang from end to end, solid construction with no fragile part waiting to fail under pressure. It's not the most elegant knife you'll find at this price point, and it doesn't try to be. The handle is thick. The balance sits toward the blade, which actually helps with impact cuts. Exactly the kind of work a real utility knife needs to handle in the field. It's the practical definition of a tool that does the job without promising anything it can't back up later, and that consistency, more than any claim on the box, is what puts it at the top of this list. Second, the K-Bar USMC Fighting utility knife. This isn't a Navy SEAL knife, it's a Marine Corps knife, and I want to be clear about that so nobody confuses one claim for another. But it carries the same thing the Mark III has, and none of the 5 traps in this video have: a documented history of military adoption, a real full tang running from the edge to the base of the handle, and carbon steel that any client of mine could sharpen out in the woods with nothing more than a plain stone. It needs more care against rust than a stainless blade does. That's simply the trade-off for a steel that holds a genuinely sharp edge under heavy use. Third, the Morek Neve Companion. I'm recommending this one with zero military claim attached because it doesn't need one to stand on its own. It's the gold standard of the affordable bushcraft knife, a well-secured tang bonded solidly into a molded handle, reliable steel that's well known and well tested in the field, and a factory edge that comes ready to work without any extra effort. It earns its spot here precisely because it's honest about what it is. A well-built bush tool that never tried to wear a tactical story that was never really its own. Before you buy any knife, here's what to actually check. First, ask whether the steel is named and whether the hardness rating is published. If the product page won't tell you either one, that's a warning sign on its own. Second, check whether it's full tang or partial tang. Full tang holds up to leverage and repeated impact. Partial tang breaks right at the base of the handle. Third, if it's a folder, check the lock type and actually test its strength. Push the blade sideways before you ever trust it near your fingers. Fourth, make sure the edge geometry matches what you're actually going to use it for, because bushcraft, tactical, and everyday carry-all call for different grinds. Fifth, look at the corrosion resistance and the real quality of the coating, because a nice matte finish is not the same thing as real chemical protection. Sixth, think about the durability of the sheath or the pocket clip, because a poorly made sheath will wreck a stored edge day after day without you even noticing. And finally, compare the price to known benchmarks of real quality, not to the language in the ad, but to the actual steel and construction being claimed. Tell me in the comments right now, honestly, what knife do you own today? How many trips or how many real field uses has it actually seen? And has it ever failed you at a moment when you had absolutely no backup? If the answer is yes, tell me exactly what broke. It might be the next knife I put through a real test on this channel.